What was the worst job interview you've had? At an interview to be a county street sweeper, guy asks me if I have a girlfriend, proceeds to rant for 5 minutes how young people don't get married anymore. Then he asks me what I want to avoid at the job. At the time I had no idea how to answer as I'd never been asked that in an interview before, so I ask him to clarify, to which he just repeats the question, over and over until he gets super angry that I don't know how to answer that, then asks me to leave. To this day, biggest WTF interview I've had. Showed up looking good in my suit with a ton of knowledge on Capital Partners. It turned out I had researched the wrong company named Capital Partners. Interviewer, putting candy bars on the table to open the interview. Have a candy bar. Do you want Hershey's or Snickers? Me, neither, thanks. Go ahead, pick one. I don't want any candy now, thanks. Take one, Hershey's or Snickers. Okay, I'll take the Snickers. No, I want the Snickers. You take the Hershey's. No, thank you. Had an interview, went well. I was offering the job on the spot and accepted. The HR manager went to get the needed paperwork, came back 10 minutes later and said I must have forgot that we already filled this position. I'm sorry, but we don't have an opening. I could call you if something opens back up. I said no thank you. Video chat interview. Red flag number 1. The interview was with 10 interviewers. I was told it would be one-on-one. Red flag number 2. Towards the end they asked if I had any questions. When I asked, "Do you all enjoy working here?" they all looked at each other nervously for about 20 seconds until someone said, "Sure. I mean, as much as you can enjoy work, I guess." Nope. I told them I couldn't answer their questions, farted audibly out of stress and thanked them for their time. I went in to apply for an administrative assistant position and the guy kept asking me questions about liking kids and are my passports up to date, etc. I was so confused. Turns out what he really wanted was a nanny for his 2 young kids to travel with him and his wife back to India. I was so pissed he wasted my time. I noped right the FK out of there. Realized it was a pyramid scheme halfway through the interview. I was already working so didn't accept the job. 5 interview rounds, with the last interview round being with the CEO, all for an entry-level customer service job. During the last interview, the CEO said you weren't allowed to get sick, and you weren't allowed to leave at the end of the day until all of the work had been done. So even though the job was 8 to 4, the CEO said customer service reps often stayed until 6 p.m. or later. She also asked if I would be comfortable secretly reporting to her about what the customer service team is up to. I declined the job offer and the company harassed me with emails asking why and what they did wrong. Really glad I didn't take the job. It was my best interview, great rapport with the interviewer, gave me the job on the spot. It for a transfer to QA at Johnson Control. Came into work the next day to have the offer rescinded. The job was already given to the plant manager's niece and it had only been posted because of company policy. The story is much longer and complicated afterward, but it was the first of several times I had been promoted, different companies, and then been told, never mind. Had an interview at an office supplies store once. Guy told me straight up it was a high-pressure sales quota job. Their prices on computers and peripherals were shit and that's what it'd be selling. Dude straight up said it's a lot of work for low pay, not a lot of people enjoy working there, and he finished off with the fact that has been there for 18 years. Practically ran out of that interview screaming. An interviewer told me that he worried I would be sexually harassed if I joined his team. Red flag. When he said he'll give you extra hours if you bring me smokes every day. Then put his hand on my leg and said his wife gives him passes to have fun. I also got a speeding ticket on the way to the interview. Was not my month. Job was for a vibration analysis engineer. I knew how to do the job well. I knew the pay should be around $95K, and they stated $55K in the interview. When I tried to discuss my point, they said, "Don't worry, there's plenty of overtime." They also mentioned since they weren't involved with many balancings at the moment, I would assist the cleaning crew with a lot of the cleanings. I've never been so uninterested in a job in my life. I had an interview with EMC back in the day. I don't remember the specifics other than I was really nervous. I had a "we are sorry to inform you" email waiting for me before I finished the 10-minute trip home. Not that bad, but I remember Taco Bell asked me what type animal I would be if I could be anything. Like, WTF do you want me to say? I would be a fire ant so I could work efficiently with my closest friends. 16-year-old me said an eagle, because they're strong and they can fly. May. At an interview for a tech startup, they asked me if you could be any animal, what would you be? I answered otter because fun, active, work well with their hands and cute as FK. They really debated whether or not to hire me because of that answer because, and I quote, "we only hire predators, never prey." And they weren't sure how to quantify an otter, because none of them had ever paid the least bit of attention to any sort of animal documentary or read biology or visited a zoo recently. God, that job sucked hard. Was invited for an IT helper position when I was 17. Would help fix computers for people at a shoddy PC fix shop. They asked me, what's the first thing you check if a customer calls and says their screen doesn't turn on? I said, well, you gotta check if they have it plugged into a socket. They laughed and said thank you, that will be it. Then led me to the door and gently pushed me out. Went to that small company specializing in furnitures. Got some task to complete in AutoCAD as a test. First thing, I've noticed that the position I applied for wasn't the same as in description. Second thing is the boss shouting at everybody and swearing while I've been doing that test, and at the end he invited me to his office and f***ed off for 40 minutes where I had to wait, and it all ended up with weird conversation about his expectations and me explaining to him that it wasn't mentioned in the job description. Jesus Christ, what a cringe day that was. I drove 2 hours for the interview. Got there and the interviewer was off sick and hadn't told anyone about me coming in. Got back in my car and drove the 2 hours home. Withdrew my name from consideration. I interviewed for a project management position. The interviewer describes the job. Basically it was pure research and data entry of potential clients, then cold calling them and documenting the results. The job ad mentioned exactly none of this but was an average project management job ad, else I wouldn't have applied in the first place. I asked what exactly was the project management part, and got told that could, not would, be down the road, maybe 2 to 5 years in. But really only maybe. I thanked them for the interview opportunity, we wrapped things up and I politely left. I've never had a disastrous interview, but I have had awful jobs and bad bosses. It can't be said enough, trust your gut. Anytime I didn't get a good feeling from the interview and walking through the job site/office, it turned out to be a crappy place to work. Toxic owners and managers spread the ick around to everyone there. It was my first real job interview. It was for a graphic design position in downtown Dallas for a men's grooming product company. I was so nervous, and when I took a drink from a bottle of water I was shaking so much I spilled some on me. Also, I was very unprepared because my portfolio only contained things I made in high school for a graphic design internship I had and some hand drawings that weren't great. I was about 18-19 years old at the time. Needless to say, I did not get the job. I went and interviewed at a place doing the same job I do now. When the time came, the manager I was interviewing with asks me, so, what would you like to be making here? And I told him the amount, which was the same I was making at my previous job, and he said, oh, I don't make that much. Thanks for wasting my time. I got 2 things from this job interview: 1. Never go on an interview that doesn't have a pay scale posted on the job listing. 2. I'm an industrial electrician. I'm not showing up in dress shoes and slacks to interview for a job. Almost ruined my shoes walking around this shithole. Sitting in the waiting room with 2 other interviewees, the manager conducting the interview recognizes one of them as her friend. While they were greeting each other, I looked at the other interviewee and mentioned her. We have no chance. I got invited to a group interview. I thought it meant that a group of people would interview me, which is fairly common. I showed up and there were about 10 other kids there. We all went into a conference room and they interviewed us all at once. They asked a question and everyone took turns answering. They switched up who went first each time, and one kid completely froze when it was his turn, so we all had to sit there in the most uncomfortable silence. She said employees got marked down 1 point if they came in late to work, even in a blizzard. She said it was their responsibility to check the weather the day before and prepare accordingly. Some of their employees commuted from 100 miles away, so they didn't cut anybody any slack. Usually I send a follow-up email saying thanks for the interview, I'm interested in the job, blah blah blah, but I didn't send an email that time. I was responding to a waitressing ad with open interviews in a new city. I dressed professionally, but when I showed up there were a line of women there in club attire. I was quite confused. Anyway, I signed in and when my name was called I was brought through the kitchen into an office, so I didn't see the restaurant part. We get to talking and 25 minutes in, I realized that this is a strip club. How did I realize? They gave me a tour. The minute I saw the poles my heart dropped. I excused myself to the restroom and booked it. Nothing against strippers or sex workers, live your best life, but the pole is not for me. I was recommended by a particular manager to interview for a makeup counter position. It was a really tense, awkward interview with the store manager, and I wasn't really certain why he was so hostile toward me. Turns out he was just trying to figure out if I was in on the other manager's scheme of stealing products and selling them on Craigslist, which I found out about after she was arrested the next week. It was a shock to me because she was a bit of a mentor to me and I had no idea. I drove an hour to be interviewed for a computer repair tech job at a rental company. and 3/4 of the way through the interview they told me I was perfect for the position. However, they recently removed the position altogether. They then asked if I'd be willing to repair furniture instead until the position opened again. Maybe more weird/funny than worst, but stripper job. Interviewed with the club owner in his tiny, private office. Asked me a bunch of questions, stuff like the hardest problem I've ever solved, as if that was going to be relevant to taking my clothes off for money. At the end of the interview, the boss said, "You look like you have lovely breasts. May I see one?" I was both annoyed and amused. "One? May I see one?" It was such an oddly phrased question. I said, "If you give me the job, you can see them both," and I got the job. Worked there for all of a week. I was asked which Harry Potter character I'm most similar to, but I haven't read Harry Potter. And this obviously had nothing to do with the position I was applying for. I didn't get the job, probably because I was outed as not being part of the HP fan club. I'd kiff it was the worst, but I remember I had an interview where after we were done, as the interviewer was walking me to the exit because it was a big building, I realized as I was about to leave that I forgot my phone upstairs, so we had to make that long awkward trip back to get it. She was nice about it, but in my head I thought to myself, yeah, I'm not getting this job.